The knocking was not the sound of wood against wood. It was a slow, wet, rhythmic thud that vibrated not just the thick, arched oak doors of the Blackwood Estate, but the bone structure inside Adrian Vance's skull. It had begun moments after Adrian had disengaged the deadbolt, a purely mechanical, financial action, devoid of sentiment. The sound echoed through the silent mansion, a grand, grotesque relic of Gothic Victorian architecture. It was the sound of a massive, patient heart beating within the dust-shrouded shell of the house itself. Adrian, a man whose professional life as a high-functioning financial analyst demanded absolute control, leaned against the grime-caked wood paneling of the second-floor master suite. He had come here with a single goal: inventory the asset, determine its liability, and sell it. Sentiment was a poor investment. Yet, the air here defied logic. It was not cold, but it was chilling, a static, oppressive substance that felt like wet velvet pressed against his lungs. The house sat deep within the eldritch thicket, a sprawling, ancient wood where the trees did not merely grow, they twisted. Their branches curled into permanent gestures of despair, and the light filtered through the canopy was perpetually the sickly green of decay. A low, constant, almost inaudible hum emanated from the forest, the sound of history weeping. This was his grandmother, Livia Vance's, legacy. Livia, the woman the town had shunned as the prophetess of the perverse, the eccentric who saw things Adrian refused to acknowledge. Adrian had opened every frosty, grime-coated window. The chilling breeze that rushed and seemed to carry petrica and the faint, sweet scent of decay, but its main purpose was pragmatic: to smooth the heavy carpet of dust where Adrian's polished Oxfords had dared to tread. In a couple of hours, the faint trail leading from the entrance to the sheet-covered furniture would be erased by the constant air movement, making his clandestine visit untraceable. The house, all 3 floors and 28 opulent, suffocating rooms, stood like a sentinel of inner conflict, surveying the grotesque, whispering wood. It was a monument to wealth and madness, situated a great distance from anywhere it should logically be. He knew nothing of how the property came into his grandmother's possession, or exactly how long it had sat derelict before her mysterious disappearance. The police investigation had been a sterile, frustrating farce, ending not in an arrest, but in a biohazard notice about the local ecosystem's sudden, localized collapse. Thump, thump, thump. The knocking intensified, migrating from the door to the core of Adrian's fear. He pressed his hand to the wall. The wood was unnervingly warm, pulsating slightly beneath his palm. It was too insistent, too deliberate to be a mere curious visitor or an animal. Adrian, a self-proclaimed monster of logic, the man who had long bled away his capacity for fear and grief, now felt a cold, foreign needle of dread trace the length of his spine. There was no one in this forsaken wood who knew he was here. He was 2 hours from the nearest town, and half that from the nearest, equally suspect farmhouse. He pushed off the wall. The sound of his own movement, a slight shift of fabric, was a deafening intrusion into the house's silence. There was no going back now. The knocking was the prelude to an encounter he had spent his entire life suppressing. He had to face it, catalogue it, and then erase it, just like the footprints in the dust. He began his silent, cautious descent. The dust carpet thickened with every step down, the shadows stretching and pooling in the corners, each one seeming to hold its breath. He was being watched, not by eyes, but by the heavy, expectant silence of the entire Blackwood estate. The knocking waited for him on the ground floor. Adrian reached the ground floor. The thudding did not crescendo. Instead, it cut off with a chilling finality, a single, resounding thud followed by a silence far heavier than before. He stood before the massive arched doors, his hands instinctively gripping the cold, brass handles. His knuckles were white anchors against the heavy wood. These doors were his last shield, and he was about to drop them. He counted to 3, exhaled the stale, oppressive air of the manor, and violently threw the doors inward. A blast of cold, clean air rushed past him, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. But there was nothing. The circular clearing surrounding the Blackwood estate was empty. The grotesque, whispering trees of the eldritch thicket stood static, frozen in their twisted shapes. There was no retreating figure, no abandoned vehicle, no curious trespasser. Only an expansive, expectant void. Adrian stared out into the darkness, his meticulous mind reeling. The knocking had been too physical, too demanding to be dismissed as mere imagination. Denial, Adrian's most trusted defense mechanism, slammed the doors shut. The heavy mechanism clicked into place, reinforcing the barrier between him and the unquantifiable threat outside. It was the wind. The house is old. The plumbing. He repeated the logic, but the lie felt brittle. He retrieved the industrial vacuum cleaner and black contractor bags he had brought, his tools for imposing order upon the chaos of his inheritance. He began to clean. This was his therapy. With every thick layer of dust suctioned away, with every sheet ripped off a piece of furniture, Adrian was not just cleaning a house, he was erasing the past, reducing Livia Vance's legacy to manageable, sellable components. Hours passed in a fugue of mechanical effort. But the house resisted. As Adrian ran the vacuum across the varnished hallway floor, a memory, cold and absolute, materialized around him. It was a grey tableau. The colors of the house dissolved, leaving only shades of monochrome, like an old photograph bleached by time. The air, thick with dust and decay a moment ago, now thinned to a sterile, cold clarity. He was no longer Adrian the inheritor. He was Adrian the grieving grandson, trapped in the memory of his grandmother's funeral. The scene was the long main aisle of a stone church, yet the interior felt like a claustrophobic box. At the far end stood the casket, closed, black, and unnervingly light. Livia Vance, the outcast, had few who mourned, yet the aisle was filled with translucent, vaporous forms of neighbors, journalists, and acquaintances. They were a flock of gossiping vultures, their expressions masked by feigned sympathy, their eyes hungry for the scraps of scandal Livia had left behind. Adrian walked, his shoes making hollow reverberations on the wooden floor of the memory. He felt nothing. He had prepared for this moment, steeling himself against the obligation of grief. I am the monster here, he thought, the phrase a comfort, confirming his emotional immunity. The memory intensified. He reached the end of the aisle. Standing opposite the casket was Dr. Alistair Thorne, Livia's physician. Dr. Thorne was the only figure in the flashback that possessed any semblance of color, though even he was deathly pale. He was the one person Livia had trusted, the one man who had never betrayed her. Adrian stopped before him. Dr. Thorne's gaze went beyond sadness. It was a mix of horror and immense burden. I was the one who called the police, Adrian, the doctor whispered, his voice cracking, though Adrian hadn't asked. She missed 3 consecutive appointments. I knew something was wrong. Dr. Thorne cried then, spilling his regrets and memories onto Adrian's deaf, unmoved conscience. He spoke of Livia's strange premonitions and her quiet despair. But Adrian couldn't focus on the words. He was consumed by the stark, undeniable truth hanging in the toxic, confused air. They were attending the funeral of an empty casket. Livia Vance's body had never been found. Adrian simply shook his head, a gesture of dismissal, not grief. He kept walking, turning his back on the casket and the weeping doctor, pushing the grey tableau out of existence with a sudden, violent step. He found himself back in the vibrant, oppressive silence of the Blackwood Estate. The memory had vanished, but the floorboards under his feet still felt cold from the phantom marble of the church. He checked his watch. It was past noon, but the eldritch thicket offered no illumination. The prevailing gloom made it feel like perpetual twilight. He had cleaned half the house. He was exhausted, but a new, cold resolve set in. He could not leave now. The house, the forest, the memory, they were holding a secret, and Adrian Vance was determined to catalogue the liability before he abandoned the asset. He would not leave until nightfall, when the lack of natural light would finally confirm his isolation. Unseen and unheard by Adrian, the forest outside had begun its irreversible transformation. The whispering hum of the thicket ceased. The Stygian mire, the lake, froze over instantly, its surface dull and lifeless. The twisted leaves of the ancient trees shivered, withered, and fell, yet were suspended inches above the dying ground, refusing to touch the earth. A breath of death, thick and impossibly foul, now flowed through the thicket, bypassing the small, unnaturally circular clearing where the house stood. Something had arrived, and it was waiting for the light to truly die. The twilight, which had perpetually clung to the eldritch thicket, finally gave way to a true, suffocating darkness. Adrian had finished cataloguing the ground floor, noting the bizarrely durable quality of the furniture and the unsettling lack of any personal belongings. Livia Vance, the woman who had lived here, had left no trace of a soul. He moved toward the back of the house, where the kitchen and service areas were located. The floorboards here were newer, concealing a structural irregularity that prickled Adrian's professional curiosity. He pulled back the ancient, oil-stained rug, revealing a small, reinforced wooden trapdoor. It wasn't merely closed. It was secured by 3 heavy-gauge nails driven deep into the frame. The heads of the nails were filed flat, a meticulous act of sealing. Adrian felt a cold dread, the kind that bypassed logic and rooted itself in instinct. This wasn't protection, it was imprisonment. He retrieved a pry bar and, with a series of jarring, metallic protests, wrenched the nails free. The last nail shrieked as it tore from the wood, and the trapdoor swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a flight of damp, stone steps leading down into an absolute void. Adrian hesitated. The cold air rising from the basement wasn't the natural chill of subterranean earth. It was a bone-deep, sterile frost that seemed to absorb the light from his flashlight. As he peered down, a sound drifted up, a faint, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging across granite. This is it, he realized. The liability. Descending the steps, he found himself in a small, circular cellar. The walls were lined with strange, crude carvings, not demonic, but geometric sigils that radiated an unnerving sense of complex, alien mathematics. In the center of the room, illuminated by the harsh white beam of his light, lay Olivia Vance. She was curled on her side, facing the door Adrian had just opened. Her body was strangely intact, preserved by the unnatural cold of the cellar, but her skin was the color of sickly grey-blue jade. The horror wasn't the death itself, but the chilling details. Her eyes were wide open, staring past Adrian with an expression of despair and desperate failure. Her left hand, reduced to bone and sinew, was stretched out towards the trapdoor, the nails of her remaining fingers worn down to bloody stubs from frantic, ceaseless scraping against the stone floor. Adrian's carefully constructed indifference shattered. This was not a quick, merciful death. This was a slow, deliberate imprisonment. He dropped his flashlight. It rolled, casting erratic beams of light that made the geometric carvings dance like mocking, silent spectators. Then, he saw the final, crucial detail. The 3 large, heavy-gauge nails he had just removed lay scattered beside her body. He hadn't just found the victim, he had found the murder scene. Olivia Vance had sealed herself in. The 3 nails, driven from the inside, were the last, futile act of a woman trying to end a connection she couldn't break. As the magnitude of the sacrifice hit him, the air in the cellar grew impossibly heavy. A sound began, a low, mechanical hissing that rose into a high-pitched, metallic shriek. From behind Olivia Vance's rigid form, a plume of serpentine black smoke erupted. It wasn't ordinary smoke. It was thick, oily, and seemed to possess sentience, coiling and writhing like a hungry cobra. It smelled of sulfur and burnt copper, carrying with it the faint, impossible sound of a million distant, muffled screams. The smoke poured into the air, instantly melting the ice that had preserved the body. The house, unable to contain the expulsion of this energy, began to tear itself apart. The walls of the cellar buckled inward with a groaning sound, and the floor above Adrian exploded into a shower of splintered wood and plaster. Adrian scrambled up the steps, choking on the black smoke, his mind reeling with the realization that the house itself was the liability, and it was disintegrating. He burst out of the back door into the eldritch thicket. The Blackwood Estate was dissolving. Where solid timber and stone had stood, only a rapidly dispersing cloud of black, sulphurous dust remained. The magnificent manor, Olivia Vance's entire estate, was gone in seconds, leaving behind only a circular patch of scorched earth. And standing at the edge of the clearing, directly on the frozen, dark surface of the Stygian mire, was the silhouette Adrian had been unconsciously dreading. A figure of impossible stature, draped in a heavy, black cloak woven from shadow, stood motionless. The cloak did not move with the wind. It pulsed with an internal, terrifying energy. On its head, where a face should have been, was a cracked porcelain mask. From the hairline fractures in the mask, a viscous, black substance, like HCN, slowly oozed, dripping soundlessly onto the frozen lake. A low, grating voice, like the sound of rust scraping against glass, filled the air, cutting through the silence of the murdered wood. "You are late, Adrian Vance. Your inheritance is messy." The voice was devoid of tone, chillingly formal. "And you've ruined the centerpiece." The ledger keeper had arrived. Adrian stood trembling on the scorched earth, the lingering scent of sulfur still sharp in his nostrils. His meticulous, controlled world had just been reduced to dust. He could feel the serpentine black smoke dissipating around him, its passing leaving a cold vacuum in the air. He looked from the empty ground, where the Blackwood Estate had been, to the towering figure on the frozen Stygian mire. The ledger keeper's black, viscous mask oozed silently. The eyes, or rather, the points where eyes should have been, were 2 glowing pinpricks of violent crimson, holding Adrian's gaze with chilling authority. "Move, Adrian Vance, the keeper commanded, his voice a low, grating resonance, amplified by the silent, dead forest. The debt demands conversation. The ice is solid, for now. Your grandmother was many things, but a fool was not one of them. Adrian was not brave, but his terror had curdled into a cold, academic defiance. He had faced down hostile boards of directors and cutthroat market collapses. This was just a different kind of hostile takeover. He stepped onto the lake, the hard, unnatural ice biting through his leather soles. The keeper did not wait for Adrian to reach him. He began to speak, his voice weaving a narrative that was ancient, formal, and utterly devoid of warmth. A long time ago, before the concept of debt was codified by men, there was an auditor. An ordinary man, consumed by an extraordinary flaw, lethargy. He sought the path of least resistance, no matter the moral cost, craving effortless gain. The keeper paused, the silence broken only by the faint, muffled sounds of the ice groaning beneath them. He was visited on a day when the light was sickened, by an entity known to few. A woman with hair like living shadows and eyes the color of congealed blood. Her skin was ash, her secrets were temptation, and her smile was a wound. She offered him a trade, an exchange that required no physical exertion, a trade in futures. Adrian swallowed hard. He felt a chilling certainty that the auditor was the keeper himself, and the woman was the ultimate source of this curse. The auditor, blinded by his own weakness, sent her away, afraid of the evil he sensed. But a month later, his father fell ill. The auditor, bound to manual labor, despised the work needed to pay the rising expenses. The words, an easy trade, quite profitable, swam in his mind like a parasite. The keeper's mask slightly tilted, a gesture that was profoundly unsettling. He sought her out. She stood in a murdered forest, watching him beg for hours. When she finally spoke, she asked for his due. Not gold, not life, but his future, an object of endless, unquantifiable possibility, a currency that could outlast kingdoms and empires. The auditor, though he failed to understand, agreed. The contract was sealed. The keeper raised a hand, and in the space between them, the serpentine black smoke momentarily coalesced into a single, swirling vortex. The woman stipulated one condition to seal her end. The auditor must ask a question to which she must answer truthfully. He could have asked for ultimate knowledge, for the meaning of life, or for his father's health. Instead, obsessed with his single flaw, his desire for ease, he asked, "What is the trade, and how much wealth will I acquire from it?" The ledger keeper let out a sound that was less a laugh and more the shattering of dry bone. The woman, the lessor, kept her word. The trade was simple. The auditor would be granted a fraction of her power, the ability to bestow any desire upon others, money, health, immortality, all at the cost of his future. And she confirmed the trade was profitable. To her. She never said it would benefit the auditor. The keeper's true eye, a single, ghastly ruby orb visible through a crack in the mask, began to glow intensely. Enraged and cheated, the auditor tried to strike her, but the magic was done. He awoke later, marked by the exchange. His left eye turned crimson, the receipt of his grim dealings. He became the ledger keeper, bound by the contract to fulfill the desires of others, and in return, reap their futures to pay down his debt to the lessor. The keeper stepped closer, his heavy shadow falling across Adrian. The cold intensified. His curse was not merely servitude. The lessor, having claimed his future, began to tweak it. The day he was meant to meet his wife, erased. The day he was meant to find prosperity, modified into despair. She wove a tapestry of crippling tragedy around him, leaving him eternal, all-seeing, but with no life to live. And the toll. The lessor increases the toll every time the keeper nears repayment. He is a slave. He is a perpetual fountain of suffering. The ledger keeper stopped directly in front of Adrian. The oozing black substance on his mask suddenly solidified. Now you know the full nature of the inheritance, Adrian Vance. Your grandmother, Livia Vance, was an associate of this contract. You are her only surviving relative. Her future is gone, her assets are dust. But the contract itself, the debt, the power, and the curse, has been passed to you. You are the heir to the ledger. Adrian stood opposite the ledger keeper on the frozen surface of the Stygian mire. The air, thick with the silence of the murdered woods, was a cold, palpable presence between them. Adrian's terror had settled into a sharp, intellectual defense. He refused to be yet another tragic figure in the keeper's ancient, formalized narrative. The ledger, Adrian stated, his voice flat, borrowing the tone he reserved for high-stakes, impersonal business dealings. I have seen the cost. I know the loophole. You cannot compel acceptance. I can walk away and the contract vanishes, correct? The ledger keeper let out a low, grinding sound of acknowledgement. The contract must be freely accepted and sealed by a question. It is an exchange, not a theft. The assets, the Blackwood Estate, Livia Vance's collected wealth, are now dust. But the ledger, the power itself, remains yours to take or refuse. Adrian looked at the crimson glow radiating from behind the keeper's mask. He thought of Livia, sealed inside that cold cellar, and the memory of her final, desperate scratches. A shocking realization, a sliver of desperate hope, pierced his calculated logic. If I accepted this deal, Adrian asked, the words catching in his throat, could I wish for my grandmother, Livia Vance, to be brought back to life? The keeper's mask tilted again, a motion that conveyed a mocking smile without a single muscle moving. All that and more, Adrian. Life, fortune, a kingdom, immortality, all within the purview of the ledger. I would fill the void left by your future with any desire you name. Tell me the cost, Adrian demanded, refusing to be distracted. The mechanism. I don't want to end up like the auditor, an eternal mendicant bound by a perpetually escalating debt. What is the value of the future I surrender? The keeper raised a hand, and the serpentine black smoke, which had been lurking at the clearing's edge, flowed out over the ice. The crimson light from his eyes intensified, casting the smoke in an eerie, flickering red. The cost, the keeper rasped, the sound now dangerously close to a whisper, is determined by the diminishing value of the desire you select. The future you surrender becomes the collateral for the wish. As the wish fades, so too does your stolen future. He began illustrating his point with terrifying precision, the smoke weaving visions in the air. Say you wished for a vast sum of money. If that wealth was spent or lost to market collapse, your future would follow that diminishing curve, slowly decaying until you are left hollow. Say you wished for a simple trinket, kept safe and away from harm, your future would remain in near-perfect stasis, but the trade would be worthless, a debt never paid. The keeper leaned in, the stench of burnt sulfur overwhelming. He lowered his voice, the sound reaching only Adrian. Hypothetically, say you wished for a large, imposing house, and say that house, in time, became neglected, forgotten, ruined. Your future would leave you likewise. But say that your dearest nephew were to visit, clean the house, bring a brief spark of life back into it. You'd have the good side of 10 minutes to finish all your worldly affairs before the structure, and the borrowed future, collapsed entirely. Adrian's breath hitched. That was a direct, chilling reference to the Blackwood Estate, to his own arrival, and to the time Livia had gained by sealing herself away. She knew I would come. She bought 10 minutes of life. That was specific, Adrian managed, his voice now cold, all remnants of fear replaced by a deadly calculation. I answer the question in a way you will understand, the keeper replied with feigned innocence. If you were to wish for your grandmother's life, Adrian, the moment she, or the life force you borrow, dies, is the moment your future is completely consumed. It is a death sentence, no matter how kind the terms. The keeper then dropped his final, brutal payload. But you cannot accept that life sentence yet. You understand, of course, that Livia Vance was murdered. Adrian froze. How did you? I sealed the door. The keeper cut him off with a grinding noise. The ledger sees the truth of the transaction, not the petty details of cause and effect. Livia Vance was murdered, by her own hand, to end the contract before it could fully bind you. She was the one who drove the nails from the inside. But the debt remains, Adrian. It is a debt of blood and of guilt. Your guilt. The ledger keeper raised both hands. The serpentine black smoke obeyed, forming a suffocating dome around them, blocking out the dead forest entirely. The crimson light from the keeper's eyes and the single ruby orb on his mask turned the interior of the dome into a pulsing, arterial red. Behold, Adrian Vance. In the smoke dome, a breathtaking vision began to bloom. Adrian saw his dream life, a towering, minimalist apartment in the financial district. His dream car, silent and elegant, pulled up to the curb. From the driver's seat emerged a younger, more attractive Adrian, leading his perfect, vibrant family. And walking out of the apartment, alive and smiling, was Livia Vance, ready to join them for a vacation free of envy, remorse, and regret. This was the life his soul had craved, a life built on the foundations of ease and control. Adrian stared, mesmerized. The ledger keeper was offering him salvation from himself. But as he looked down, the surface of the Stygian mire below his feet suddenly became translucent, revealing the dark truth beneath the ice. The lake refracted the reality of his heart. Beneath the flawless, reflective ice, he saw not clear water, but a deep, churning blackness. And in that blackness, writhing figures, the futures that had been consumed to pay the keeper's debt, were pressed against the underside of the ice, their faces a canvas of eternal torment. They were silent, yet Adrian heard their millionfold scream in his mind, the sound of sheer, unadulterated suffering. Adrian looked away from the screaming faces and back at the perfect life in the smoke dome. Fact and fiction. He knew they could easily be switched. One simple deal could break the boundaries. Do you understand what I'm offering you now, Adrian? The keeper's voice was a soft, insidious comfort. A life free from what you've done, and free from what you could do. You can erase the monster you believe yourself to be. Adrian finally broke the silence, his voice not shaking, but utterly and profoundly cold. It was a coldness that mirrored the Stygian mire itself. I know the truth, Ledger Keeper, Adrian said, shaking his head slowly. I already know who murdered Livia Vance. The auditor's flaw was lethargy. Mine is guilt. I am the monster. I won't trade that knowledge for the ease of your contract. He took a step back. You are correct. You cannot compel acceptance. I will take my leave and live with the monster I am. I refuse the ledger. The keeper's crimson eyes glowed one final time, a cold, empty light. You'll plummet eventually, Adrian Vance. You'll fall fast and with considerable brutality. And I'll be there to lift you. I will always be there to lift you. And every time, Adrian replied, matching the keeper's dead flatness, I'll reject you. The serpentine black smoke dispersed instantly, the crimson light vanishing. The ledger keeper was gone, leaving no trace but the silence. The ice of the Stygian mire, as quickly as it had frozen, began to thaw. The crackling sound became a groan, then a thunderous roar. The ice fractured beneath Adrian's feet, and he fell through the black mirror and into the abyssal cold. I awoke to the chirping of mechanical birds from the automated environmental system in my high-rise apartment. It wasn't the melodic natural sound I remembered from a lifetime ago, but a sterile, synthesized loop designed to mask the cacophony of the city 20 floors below. It was this sound, coupled with the regulated, temperature-controlled air that blew past the thermal dampening curtains, that pulled me from an encumbering, abyssal slumber. Years have passed since my visit to the eldritch thicket. In my dreams, I still taste the copper and sulfur of the serpentine smoke, and feel the agonizing cold of the Stygian mire. Not a day passes without reliving the grim specifics, the cellar, the nails, the grey-blue body of Livia Vance, and the chilling finality of the ledger keeper's offer. I survived the mire. I don't know how. Perhaps the same alien energy that kept the ice frozen for the ledger keeper's performance also provided a necessary, though horrifying, thermal shock. I crawled from the thawing lake, a mendicant coated in black mire, and walked out of the forest, leaving the disintegrating remnants of the Blackwood Estate behind. Here is what I know now, years later. Livia Vance, my grandmother, is dead, and her body was never found. Her murderer walks free, not because of a successful crime, but because all evidence of her death, and all incriminating assets gained by her deal, vanished with the collapse of the Blackwood Estate. I finally understand the nails in the trapdoor. Livia had signed the contract, gaining wealth and the isolation of the thicket, but the debt kept escalating. She knew the only way to shield me, her sole remaining relative, was to ensure the liability was not transferred. The contract required a clean transference of the asset or its voiding through the death of the borrowed life force. By locking herself in, she was murdered by the contract itself, buying time with her slow expiration, hoping that I, Adrian Vance, the practical, cold observer, would simply walk away when faced with the truth. The eldritch thicket is currently closed off, declared a Level 4 biohazard zone. An entire localized ecosystem collapsing and a wide array of flora decaying to ash in a single night tends to alarm authorities. I know it will regrow. It always does. The ledger keeper ensures that the stage is always set, the debts are always incurred, and the balance is eternally paid. The lights to the property, the structure, the very land she claimed, all vanished along with everything Livia Vance had owned through the ledger. The ledger keeper is still out there, and he will be until the end of time, hunting for more futures. Every time he nears the point of repayment to the lessor, the toll is increased. He visits me. He always comes, unannounced, uninvited, yet always appearing in my carefully controlled environment. He comes with the heavy scent of sulfur, his black mask oozing that viscous substance, his crimson eyes glowing. He always visits before and after something horrible. A major market collapse? He is here the evening before, sipping the aged scotch I am forced to offer him. A massive terrorist attack on a global city? He visits the day after, his silence judging my prepared bunkers and asset transfers. A declaration of war in some forgotten corner of the globe? He sits across from me, patiently waiting for me to break. It's no longer a surprise. Each visit is a horrific premonition, and I have learned to adjust my life, my portfolio, and my defenses accordingly. I invite him in. We talk. He only ever talks about the things he could give me: ease, control, the ability to erase the memory of Livia's final moments, or simply peace. The deals we could make. And each and every time, as I promised on the Thoringmire, I decline him. Sometimes, he lets a sliver of information slip about the auditor, a word, a phrase, a pattern. Like a complex cipher, I've taken to piecing it all together. Maybe, if I can understand the nature of the ledger keeper's curse, I can find a flaw, a weakness in the rules of the contract itself. He is an interesting man, a powerful tragedy forced into servitude, but I know if I offered him my future, he'd take it in the blink of his terrifying crimson eye. I no longer live in fear of the repercussions of my past actions. I don't fear the cold logic of the police or the volatility of the market. Of course, I have regrets. My life is far from the dream he showed me. I haven't achieved the ease or the control I once craved. But no matter what I do, the ledger keeper will continue to find me and offer me everything for my future. And one day, I know I'll give in. It's inevitable. Like each and every visit from that man, my surrender is a fixed point. My life is okay. My future is okay. I myself am okay. I just really wish I hadn't left my grandmother to die in that basement.